The night air was cold in the Nevada desert as Staff Sergeant Jake Rodriguez walked his usual patrol route around the military base. It was 4:30 in the morning, and most of the world was still asleep. Jake had been doing this job for 3 years now, and he thought he had seen everything. Boy, was he wrong. Jake was checking the fence line when the sky suddenly lit up, like someone had turned on a giant flashlight. A bright streak of light shot across the darkness, leaving a trail of sparks behind it. At first, Jake thought it was just a shooting star, maybe a big one. But then he heard the sound. It wasn't the whoosh of a meteor or the rumble of a plane. This was different. It was like a deep humming mixed with a crackling noise, like electricity jumping between power lines. The sound got louder and louder, and then suddenly stopped. Complete silence. Jake grabbed his radio and was about to call it in when something told him to wait. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe it was the strange feeling in his chest that something big was about to happen. He decided to check it out first. Following the direction where the light had disappeared, Jake walked about half a mile into the desert. The sand crunched under his boots, and his flashlight beam danced across the rocky ground. He climbed over a small hill and stopped dead in his tracks. There, hidden behind a cluster of tall rocks, was something that definitely wasn't from Earth. It looked like a ship, but unlike any aircraft Jake had ever seen. It was about the size of a small house, with smooth curves and no sharp edges. The metal was a strange silver color that seemed to shimmer even in the dim light of his flashlight. Strange symbols were carved into the side of the ship, glowing faintly with a blue light. They looked almost like writing, but not any language Jake recognized. The symbols moved and shifted slightly, like they were alive. Part of the ship was damaged. There was a big crack running down one side, and pieces of the strange metal were scattered on the ground. Steam or smoke was rising from somewhere inside, and Jake could hear a faint beeping sound. His heart was beating fast now. Every part of his military training told him to step back, call for backup, and let the officers handle this. But something stronger than training was pulling him forward. He had to see what was inside. Jake approached the ship carefully, his flashlight beam searching for an entrance. On the side facing away from the base, he found what looked like a door. It was partially open, with more of that blue light spilling out. He peered inside and gasped. The interior was incredible. The walls seemed to be made of the same shifting metal as the outside, and they glowed softly with their own light. Strange panels covered the walls, with symbols that pulsed and changed. It was like being inside a living computer. But what really made Jake's heart skip was what he saw in the center of the ship. There was someone there, or something. It was lying on what looked like a bed or chair, completely still. Jake climbed inside, his boots making soft echoes on the strange floor. As he got closer, he realized the being looked almost human, but not quite. She was tall and thin, with skin that had a slight blue tint to it. Her hair was long and silver, and it seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. She was wearing clothes that looked like they were made of liquid metal, form-fitting and elegant. But what really caught Jake's attention were the injuries. She had cuts on her arms and face, and instead of red blood, a silver liquid was slowly dripping from the wounds. She was breathing, but barely. Her chest rose and fell in a rhythm that seemed to slow for a human. Jake could see that without help, she wouldn't survive much longer. This was the moment that changed everything. Jake could have walked away. He could have called his commanding officer and let them handle it. But looking at this injured being, he saw something that went beyond species or planets. He saw someone who needed help. Jake had trained as a medic before becoming a soldier, and his instincts kicked in. He quickly checked her pulse, which was weak but steady. The silver blood was concerning, but the wounds themselves didn't look too deep. Working quickly, Jake pulled out his first aid kit and started cleaning the cuts. The silver liquid was warm to the touch and seemed to shimmer like mercury as he worked. He noticed that the being's skin felt different too, softer and cooler than human skin. When he applied pressure to stop the bleeding, something incredible happened. The being's eyes fluttered open, and Jake found himself looking into the most beautiful eyes he had ever seen. They were large and golden, with flecks of silver that seemed to swirl like tiny galaxies. She looked at him with confusion and fear at first, but as Jake continued to help her, something changed in her expression. It was like she could sense that he meant no harm. She tried to speak, but the sounds that came out were like music, soft and melodic, but not any language Jake had ever heard. Jake spoke softly to her, the way he would to anyone who was hurt and scared. "It's okay," he said. "I'm here to help. You're going to be fine." Even though she couldn't understand his words, she seemed to understand his tone. The fear in her golden eyes slowly faded, replaced by something that looked like gratitude. As Jake worked on her injuries, he realized he was at a crossroads. He could still report this and let the military take over. But looking at this being, this person who had somehow traveled across the stars only to crash on his planet, he knew he couldn't let that happen. The military would study her, question her, maybe even hurt her. But Jake saw something different. He saw someone who was lost, far from home, and in need of a friend. So he made a decision that would change both their lives forever. He would help her, no matter what it cost him. Little did he know that this choice would lead him on an adventure beyond his wildest dreams. 2 days had passed since Jake found the crashed ship, and keeping this secret was harder than he thought. During the day, he went about his normal duties at the base, checking equipment and following orders. But his mind was always somewhere else, thinking about the mysterious being he had hidden in the old maintenance bunker. The bunker was perfect for hiding someone. It had been abandoned for years, located far from the main base where nobody ever went. Jake had carefully moved her there on that first night, supporting her weak body as they walked slowly through the desert darkness. She was much taller than Jake had first realized, probably around 6.5 feet tall. Her movements were graceful, almost like she was floating rather than walking, even injured and weak. There was something royal about the way she carried herself. Jake had been visiting her twice a day, bringing food, water, and medical supplies. He told his fellow soldiers that he was doing extra maintenance work in the outer areas, which wasn't completely untrue. The hardest part was acting normal when everything inside him was buzzing with excitement and worry. On this particular evening, Jake made his usual trip to the bunker as the sun was setting. He carried a backpack full of supplies, including some books and a notepad. He had an idea about how they might start communicating better. When he opened the bunker door, she was sitting cross-legged on the floor, and Jake noticed something amazing. Her injuries were almost completely healed, where there had been deep cuts just 2 days ago. Now there were only faint silver lines on her blue-tinted skin. Her people must heal much faster than humans. She looked up when he entered, and those incredible golden eyes lit up with what Jake could only describe as happiness. It was strange how much emotion she could express without saying a word he could understand. "Hey there," Jake said softly, setting down his backpack. "Feeling better?" She responded with those musical sounds again, but this time something incredible happened. As she spoke, Jake felt a strange tingling in his mind, like someone was gently touching his thoughts. Suddenly, he could sense what she was trying to say, even though he didn't understand the words. She was thanking him, not just for the medical help, but for his kindness, for not turning her over to his people, for treating her like a person instead of a thing to be studied. Jake sat down across from her, pulling out his notepad and pencil. "I brought these so we could try to communicate better," he said, showing her the pad. She looked at the simple tools with curiosity, then did something that amazed Jake. She placed her hand gently on his forehead, and suddenly his mind was filled with images and feelings that weren't his own. He saw flashes of her world, a beautiful planet with 2 suns that painted the sky in shades of purple and gold. He saw cities that floated in the clouds, connected by bridges made of light. He saw people like her, tall and graceful, living in harmony with nature and technology. But then the images turned darker. He saw explosions, ships fighting in space, and people running in fear. He felt her sadness and desperation as she fled from her home, alone and scared. When the connection ended, Jake was breathing hard. "You're "A princess," he said, somehow knowing it was true. "And your world is at war." She nodded. And Jake heard a voice in his mind, soft and musical like her spoken words. It was the strangest thing, but he could understand her now, as if she had found a way to translate her thoughts into his language. "My name is Zara," the voice said inside his head. "I am the daughter of King Aldrin of the Endorian Empire. My father ruled with wisdom and peace, but power-hungry generals overthrew him. They want to wage war on other worlds, to conquer and destroy instead of explore and learn." Jake was amazed by this mental communication, but he tried to stay focused on her story. "So you escaped?" "Barely," Zara's mental voice continued. "My ship was damaged in the fight. I've been traveling through space for weeks, trying to find somewhere safe to make repairs. When I saw your world, I hoped I could land quietly, fix my ship, and continue my journey." "Where are you trying to go?" Jake asked. "To the Council of Worlds," Zara explained. "They're a group of peaceful planets that work together. If I can reach them, they might help me restore peace to my world and bring my father back to power." Over the next few hours, Jake and Zara continued their strange conversation. She told him about her world's technology, how they had learned to travel between stars, and how they had made contact with dozens of other civilizations. She spoke of libraries that contained the knowledge of entire galaxies and of her dream to see all worlds living in peace. Jake shared his own story too. He told her about growing up on Earth, about joining the military to serve his country, and about his growing feeling that he was meant for something bigger than just following orders. As they talked, Jake began to understand just how intelligent and knowledgeable Zara was. Despite being royalty, she had studied engineering and space travel. She knew exactly what was wrong with her ship and what parts she needed to fix it. "The problem is," Zara explained, "the components I need are very rare. They're made from elements that don't exist naturally on most worlds. But from what I've sensed about your military installation, you have some of these materials in your research facilities." Jake's heart skipped. "You want me to steal from the base?" "I don't want to ask you to risk your safety," Zara said. And Jake could feel her genuine concern for him. "But without these parts, my ship will never fly again. I'll be trapped here, and my people will remain under the control of those who would use our technology to hurt others." Jake looked at this remarkable being who had somehow traveled across the vast emptiness of space, only to crash on his tiny planet. She could have demanded his help or used her advanced technology to force him to cooperate. Instead, she was asking and worrying about putting him in danger. "What kind of parts do you need?" Jake asked. Zara's golden eyes brightened with hope. "Rare earth elements, specifically refined iridium and crystallized beryllium. Also, quantum processors that can handle interdimensional calculations." Jake nodded slowly. He knew the base had advanced materials lab where they tested experimental technologies. Getting access wouldn't be easy, but it wasn't impossible either. "I'll help you," Jake said finally, "but we'll need to be very careful. If we get caught, it won't just be me in trouble. They'll capture you too." Zara reached out and took Jake's hand in hers. Her skin was cool and soft, and Jake felt that strange tingling again. But this time it was different. It was warm and comforting, like a gentle hug for his mind. "Thank you," she said, both out loud and in his thoughts. "I know this is dangerous for you, but I promise if we succeed, I'll find a way to repay your kindness." As Jake looked into her swirling golden eyes, he realized that this was just the beginning. Tomorrow night, they would start the most dangerous mission of his life. The next week was the most stressful time of Jake's life. During the day, he went about his normal duties, but every night he became a different person. He was no longer just a soldier following orders. He was a secret agent on the most important mission of his life. Jake had studied the base layout for years, but now he was seeing it through different eyes. He memorized the guard schedules, the locations of security cameras, and the times when different areas were empty. The Advanced Materials Lab was in Building C, 3 buildings away from his usual patrol route. The first night of their operation, Jake's hands were shaking as he approached the lab. He had never stolen anything in his life, and the thought of betraying his military oath made his stomach feel sick. But every time he doubted himself, he remembered Zara's golden eyes and her story about the war on her world. Jake used his security card to enter the building. His heart was beating so loud he was sure the guards could hear it from the next room. The lab was dark except for the glow of various machines and computers. Rows of shelves held containers filled with rare metals and experimental materials. Finding the iridium was easier than Jake had expected. It was stored in a special container that looked like a small refrigerator. The metal itself was beautiful, with a shine that reminded Jake of Zara's silver hair. He carefully took a small piece, hoping nobody would notice it was missing. The beryllium was harder to find. Jake spent almost an hour searching through labeled containers before he found the right one. The crystallized beryllium looked like tiny diamonds, each one perfectly clear and sparkling under the lab lights. But the quantum processors were the real challenge. Jake had no idea what they even looked like until Zara had described them during their telepathic conversations. They were about the size of a coin but incredibly complex, with patterns that seemed to shift and change when you looked at them. Jake found them in a locked cabinet marked experimental technology. Authorized personnel only, using a trick he had learned during his training. He managed to pick the lock. Inside were dozens of different devices, but only 3 matched Zara's description. As Jake pocketed the processors, he heard footsteps in the hallway outside. His blood went cold. Someone was coming. Jake quickly closed the cabinet and hid behind a large machine. The footsteps got closer, and he could see a flashlight beam moving under the door. For what felt like forever, Jake held his breath, waiting for the door to open. But the guard just checked that the door was locked and moved on. Jake waited another 10 minutes before carefully leaving the lab. His legs felt like jelly as he walked back to his quarters, the stolen materials hidden in his backpack every night for the next week. Jake met Zara at the crash site. The damaged ship was hidden perfectly behind the rocks, and they had set up a small workspace using equipment Jake had borrowed from the base. Working with Zara was like nothing Jake had ever experienced. Her knowledge of technology was incredible, but she explained everything in simple terms so Jake could understand and help. She showed him how the ship's systems worked, how the quantum processors controlled the engine, and how the rare metals were used to create the energy needed for space travel. "Your people are more advanced than I thought," Zara said one night as they worked together to install the new processors. "These components are very sophisticated for a world that hasn't achieved interstellar travel yet. We're always trying to learn and improve," Jake replied, carefully holding a delicate part while Zara connected it to the ship's main system. As they worked, Jake and Zara talked about everything. Zara told him about her childhood on Andoria, how she had always been curious about other worlds and had studied engineering against her father's wishes. She described the floating cities of her world, where buildings grew like plants and transportation used beams of light. Jake shared his own dreams and fears. He told her about his difficult childhood, how he had joined the military to find purpose, and how he had always felt like he was meant for something bigger than his small life on Earth. "You are meant for something bigger," Zara said, her mental voice warm and encouraging. "I can sense it in you. You have a good heart and a brave spirit. Those are rare qualities in any world." The work was dangerous in ways Jake hadn't expected. The ship's systems were incredibly powerful, and one wrong move could create an energy surge that would light up every radar screen for miles. Twice they had to stop working and hide when military helicopters flew overhead. On the 4th night, disaster almost struck. Jake was installing the crystallized beryllium when he accidentally crossed 2 wires. The entire ship lit up like a Christmas tree, and a loud humming sound filled the air. "Turn it off," Zara shouted, working frantically at the control panel. Jake pulled the wires apart, and the ship went dark again. They both sat in silence for several minutes, listening for any signs that someone at the base had noticed the energy spike. "That was too close," Jake said, his heart still racing. "But we learned something important," Zara replied. "The systems are responding. We're almost ready for the final test." As the days passed, Jake noticed that Zara was getting stronger and more confident. Her injuries were completely healed, and she moved with the grace and dignity of someone born to lead. But Jake also noticed something else. She was spending more time looking at him, and her golden eyes held an expression he couldn't quite understand. One night, as they worked side by side replacing the ship's navigation system, Zara suddenly stopped what she was doing. "Jake," she said, both out loud and in his mind, "I need to tell you something." Jake looked up from the component he was installing. "What is it?" "When I first crashed on your world, I thought I was alone. I thought I would either die here or be captured by your people. I never expected to find someone like you." Jake felt that familiar tingling in his mind as Zara's thoughts touched his. But this time, the feeling was different. It was warm and gentle, like sunlight on his face. "You saved my life," Zara continued. "But more than that, you showed me that not all worlds are filled with war and hatred. You showed me that there are still people who help others simply because it's the right thing to do." Jake didn't know what to say. He had never been good with emotional conversations. But something about Zara made him want to open up. "I've never met anyone like you either," Jake admitted. "You're brave and smart and kind. You could have demanded my help or threatened me. But instead you asked nicely and worried about my safety." They worked in comfortable silence for a while, both lost in their own thoughts. The ship was nearly ready, and Jake knew that soon Zara would have to leave. The thought made him feel sad in a way he had never experienced before. As the week came to an end, Jake realized that his feelings for Zara had grown into something deeper than friendship. But he also knew that she was a princess from another world, and he was just a soldier from Earth. Their lives were too different for anything to work between them, or so he thought. Little did Jake know that Zara was having the exact same thoughts about him, and that she was about to make an offer that would change everything. 3 weeks had passed since Jake first found Zara's crashed ship, and everything was about to change. The ship's repairs were almost complete, humming quietly behind the desert rocks where it had been hidden. But Jake could sense that something was different about Zara tonight. She had been quieter during their work sessions, often stopping to look at him with those golden eyes that seemed to see right into his soul. Jake had noticed the change but hadn't said anything. He was dealing with his own complicated feelings about what was coming next. The military base had started expanding their search patterns. Jake had overheard conversations between officers about strange energy readings in the desert. Someone had mentioned bringing in specialists from the government to investigate unusual electromagnetic signatures. Time was running out. Jake arrived at the crash site just as the sun was setting, painting the desert sky in shades of orange and pink. Zara was sitting on a large rock near her ship, looking up at the stars that were just beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "The ship is ready," she said as Jake approached. Her voice carried a sadness that made Jake's heart ache. "That's good news," Jake replied, though he didn't feel happy about it at all. "When do you leave?" "Tomorrow night," Zara said softly. "I've been monitoring your military communications. They're planning a major search of this area starting the day after tomorrow. If I don't leave by then, we'll both be in serious trouble." Jake nodded, trying to hide his disappointment. He had known this day would come, but he wasn't prepared for how much it would hurt. Over the past 3 weeks, Zara had become the most important person in his life. The thought of never seeing her again felt like losing a piece of himself. They worked together for the next few hours, making the final adjustments to the ship's systems. The quantum processors were functioning perfectly, and the rare metals had been integrated into the engine core. The ship was more than ready for interstellar travel. As they worked, Jake couldn't help but think about how much his life had changed. 3 weeks ago, he was just a soldier following orders and going through the motions. Now he felt alive in a way he had never experienced before. Every day brought new discoveries, new challenges, and new reasons to push himself beyond what he thought possible. "Jake," Zara said suddenly, breaking him out of his thoughts, "can you sit with me for a moment? There's something important I need to discuss with you." They sat together on the warm sand, the ship's soft blue glow creating a circle of light. Around them, Zara was quiet for a long time. and Jake could feel her internal struggle through their mental connection. "When I first came to your world," Zara began, "I thought I was just passing through. I planned to repair my ship, refuel, and continue my journey to the Council of Worlds. I never expected to find someone like you." Jake felt his heart beating faster. "What do you mean?" "I mean that you've changed everything for me," Zara said, turning to face him. "You saved my life, yes, but you did so much more than that. You showed me that there are still good people in the universe, people who help others without expecting anything in return." Jake looked into her golden eyes and saw emotions swirling there. "Like tiny galaxies, you changed my life too," he said. "Honestly, before I met you, I felt like I was just going through the motions. Now I feel like I'm actually living." Zara reached out and took his hand, and Jake felt that familiar warm tingling in his mind. But this time, the sensation was stronger, more intense. He could feel her emotions as if they were his own. "Jake," Zara said, her mental voice combining with her spoken words, "I need to ask you something, and I want you to know that whatever you decide, I'll understand." "What is it?" Jake asked, though part of him already knew what she was going to say. "Come with me," Zara said simply. "Leave this world and help me restore peace to mine." Jake felt like the ground had dropped out from under him. "What? I've been thinking about this for days," Zara continued. "My world is in chaos. The generals who overthrew my father are preparing for war against other peaceful planets. If I return alone, I might not be strong enough to stop them. But if I had someone like you by my side, someone with your courage and kindness, we could make a real difference." Jake's mind was spinning. "But I'm just a soldier. I don't know anything about ruling planets or fighting space wars. You know about leadership," Zara said. "You know about loyalty and doing what's right even when it's difficult. Those are exactly the qualities my world needs right now." Jake stood up and walked a few steps away, trying to process what Zara was asking. Leave Earth? Leave everything he had ever known? It seemed impossible. "I know it's a lot to ask," Zara said. "Following him, you would be giving up your entire life here, your career, your friends, your family. And there's no guarantee we would succeed in restoring peace to my world. What about the journey?" Jake asked. "How long would it take to reach your planet?" "Several months," Zara admitted. "And the return trip would take just as long if you ever decided to come back. I won't lie to you, Jake, if you come with me, you might never see Earth again." Jake looked up at the stars, trying to imagine traveling between them. The idea was both terrifying and exciting. "What would happen to me on your world? I'm not like your people. I don't have your telepathic abilities or your advanced knowledge." "You would be my partner," Zara said. "My equal in every way. I would share my knowledge with you, teach you about our technology and our culture. And you would teach me about human courage and determination." Jake felt tears forming in his eyes. "Zara, I know it's impossible," Zara said quickly. "I know I'm asking too much. You have a life here, responsibilities. I had to ask. These past 3 weeks have been the happiest of my life, and I can't imagine facing the future without you." Jake turned to look at her and saw tears of silver running down her blue-tinted cheeks. In that moment, he realized that his feelings for Zara went far beyond friendship or even love. She had become a part of him, and the thought of losing her was unbearable. "If I said yes," Jake asked slowly, "what would happen to my life here? People would think I deserted, or that I was captured by enemies." "You could leave a message," Zara suggested. "Something that would explain your choice without revealing the truth about me." Jake thought about his commanding officer, his fellow soldiers, his few friends back home. How could he explain that he was leaving to help an alien princess save her world? They would think he had lost his mind. But then he thought about the alternative. Going back to his old life, pretending that none of this had happened. Spending the rest of his days wondering what might have been. The idea made him feel empty inside. "I need time to think," Jake said finally. "Of course," Zara replied. "I leave tomorrow night. If you decide to come with me, meet me here at midnight. If not, I'll understand." They spent the rest of the evening in quiet conversation, both lost in their own thoughts. As Jake walked back to the base that night, he felt like he was standing at the edge of a cliff. Behind him was the safe, familiar world he had always known. Ahead was the unknown, full of dangers and possibilities he couldn't even imagine. The next day would be the longest of Jake's life, as he struggled to make the most important decision he would ever face. The day passed like a slow-motion dream. Jake went through his regular duties at the base, but his mind was somewhere else entirely. Every few minutes, he would catch himself staring at the sky, thinking about Zara's incredible offer. Come with her to another world, help restore peace to an entire planet, leave everything he had ever known behind. His fellow soldiers noticed that something was different about him. During lunch, his friend Tony asked if he was feeling okay. Jake just smiled and said he was tired from all the extra patrol work he had been doing. If only Tony knew the truth about what that patrol work really involved. As evening approached, Jake found himself walking to his quarters with heavy steps. He had made his decision, but saying it out loud would make it real. He sat at his small desk and pulled out a piece of paper and a pen. Writing the letter was one of the hardest things he had ever done. Dear Colonel Harrison, he began, his hand shaking slightly as he wrote. By the time you read this, I will be gone. I know this will seem impossible to believe, but I have been given the chance to help with something bigger than anything I ever imagined. I cannot explain the details, but please know that I have not abandoned my duties lightly. I have found a cause that needs me more than the army does. Please tell my family that I love them, and that I am safe. Maybe someday I will be able to explain everything. Until then, please remember me as someone who tried to do the right thing. Respectfully, Staff Sergeant Jake Rodriguez. Jake sealed the letter in an envelope and placed it on his bed, where it would be found in the morning. Then he packed a small bag with a few personal items, his medical supplies, and a photograph of his family. Everything else he would leave behind. The walk to the crash site felt like the longest journey of his life. Each step took him further from the world he knew and closer to an uncertain future. But with each step, Jake also felt a growing sense of excitement. For the first time in his life, he was choosing his own path instead of following orders. Zara was waiting by her ship when Jake arrived. She was wearing a new outfit that looked like it was made of liquid starlight, and her silver hair was braided with tiny gems that sparkled in the moonlight. She looked every bit the princess she was, beautiful and regal and otherworldly. You came, she said, and Jake could hear the relief and joy in her voice. I almost didn't, Jake admitted, walking toward her. I spent all day thinking about everything I would be leaving behind. My career, my friends, my family. This is the craziest thing I have ever done. And yet here you are, Zara said, reaching out to take his hands. What changed your mind? Jake looked into her golden eyes and felt that familiar warmth spreading through his chest. I realized that I was already living a half-life here, going through the motions, following orders, never really feeling alive. These past 3 weeks with you have been the most real I have ever felt. I don't want to go back to sleepwalking through my days. Zara smiled, and Jake felt her happiness through their mental connection. I promise you won't regret this decision. Together, we can accomplish amazing things. They spent the next hour preparing for departure. Zara showed Jake the special chamber she had prepared for him, designed to help his human body adjust to the stresses of interstellar travel. The technology was incredible, like something from a science fiction movie. The journey will take several months, Zara explained as she helped Jake into the travel suit. You'll sleep for most of it while your body adapts to the changes. When you wake up, we'll be approaching my world. What will I see when we get there? Jake asked, trying to imagine it. Beauty beyond description, Zara said, her eyes distant with memory. Cities that float among the clouds, connected by bridges of pure light. Mountains that sing in the wind, oceans that glow with bioluminescent life, and hopefully, if we succeed, a world at peace once again. As they made the final preparations, Jake felt a strange mix of emotions. Fear about the unknown, excitement about the adventure ahead, and sadness about leaving Earth behind. But strongest of all was his certainty that he was making the right choice. "Are you ready?" Zara asked, taking her place at the ship's controls. "As ready as I'll ever be," Jake replied. Settling into the passenger seat, the ship lifted off silently, rising straight up into the night sky. Jake watched through the viewport as the military base grew smaller and smaller below them. Soon, all he could see was the vast desert, then the curve of the earth itself. "Look," Zara said softly, pointing. Ahead. Jake looked up and gasped. The stars were brighter and more beautiful than he had ever seen them, without the atmosphere to dim their light. They blazed like diamonds against the velvet darkness of space. It was the most incredible sight of his life. "This is just the beginning," Zara said, her hand finding his. "Wait until you see what else is out there." As they accelerated toward the edge of the solar system, Jake felt a profound sense of peace settle over him. He was leaving behind everything familiar, but he was also embarking on the greatest adventure any human had ever experienced. The ship's navigation systems activated, and suddenly they were moving faster than Jake had ever imagined possible. Stars began to blur past the viewport as they entered some kind of hyperspace. Jake felt drowsy as the travel chamber began to work its magic on his body. "Sleep now," Zara's voice whispered in his mind. "When you wake up, we'll be home." Jake's last thought before drifting off was about how strange life could be. 3 weeks ago, he was a lonely soldier going through the motions. Now he was traveling between the stars with an alien princess, on a mission to save an entire world. As Earth became a tiny point of light behind them, Jake smiled. He had made his choice, and he was ready for whatever came next. The universe was vast and full of wonders, and he was going to see them all. Years later, stories would spread through certain circles about the soldier who vanished without a trace, leaving behind only a mysterious letter. Some said he had been abducted by aliens. Others claimed he had gone insane and wandered into the desert. But a few people, those who knew how to look for such things, noticed something interesting in the reports from that time. On the night Jake disappeared, satellites detected a brief energy signature, moving away from Earth at impossible speed. The official explanation was a meteor or space debris, but those who studied such things wondered if it might have been something else entirely. And somewhere among the stars, in a galaxy far from Earth, legends began to grow about a brave human warrior who helped restore peace to a troubled world. Whether those legends would ever find their way back to Earth remained to be seen. But that, perhaps, is a story